a lot of times I'll talk to leaders, I'll say, what made you a good leader 5 years ago? Is that the same thing that makes you a good leader now? No.
Mhm.
And the things that will make you a great leader 3 to 5 years from now, are they the same things you're doing right now in this moment? No. And so you're going to have to try new things. You're going to have to learn and grow and develop. You will make mistakes.
Is there a space or a situation where it's good to really control not having that vulnerability, not having that certain, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, is there places where you want to hold that besides the obvious where you're walking into, a prison, I guess,
Right.
or like, is there an obvious place where you want to be able to have that control of the uncertainty or vulnerability?
I think early on, if I'm working in a healthcare setting, I
Mm-hmm.
want to control the level of vulnerability for my patients.
Mm.
Um, if I'm thinking about my kids, I'm never more vulnerable than when it comes to them.
Mm.
And so I want to have a clear sense of what the consequences might be, because I'll feel those more acutely than I do for myself. Um,
I guess in our world today, I find one of the things I find frustrating is the idea that, and I think we're probably around the same generation. I grew up thinking and believing that trust was a given until you prove me wrong, right? Like, I'm going to trust people. I have a sense of belief that most people want to be good and kind and nice, and until I'm proving wrong. Whereas I think in today's world, it's almost the opposite. It's like, we don't trust you at all until you prove you can be trusted.
right. I think you're right. Um, there, there's been, I mean, trust levels are the lowest we've ever seen,
Yeah.
the lowest we've ever recorded. And it's a threat to democracy. It's a threat to our way of life. Um, you know, trust in institutions and systems, like trust acts as a social lubricant. And it's been
Mm.
clearly shown that communities and countries with higher trust levels do better
Yeah.
in terms of mental health and efficiency and economically and, standard of living. We see these things play out and it's in decline. And um,
I think that's fascinating because with the decline of the trust levels, it feels like there's more of a trust ask that we're being given, right? From, let's just take government or whatever. We're being asked to trust them more strictly because, like, there's no give back to why I should trust you more, and it's making me trust you less the more you have to
right,
tell me, no, 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 you really should trust me. Why should I really trust you? It's like
right.
this this
Well, and
really
what
interesting
I
opposite.
I actually feel like maybe the trust ask is the same, but it feels bigger,
Yeah.
right? Because we're less confident in them. And you know, you had asked at the start of the show about, what can leaders do? I think we have to go first
Hmm.
because building trust it creates a norm of reciprocity. If I make myself a little bit vulnerable to you, then you're willing to respond in a similar fashion. And this is why I tell leaders they need to lead with their imperfections. We
Lead with
need,
your perfections.
yeah, we need
Nice.
to show people that we're not perfect and that it's okay to not be perfect. And a lot of times I'll talk to leaders, I'll say, what made you a good leader 5 years ago? Is that the same thing that makes you a good leader now? No.
Mhm.
And the things that will make you a great leader 3 to 5 years from now, are they the same things you're doing right now in this moment? No. And so you're going to have to try new things. You're going to have to learn and grow and develop. You will make mistakes.
Hmm.
You will stumble. You may fall.
Yeah.
And you need to create an environment because the world is moving so quickly. You need to create an environment where people are comfortable with the idea of learning, growing, making mistakes, failing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, so we start to think about what does that look like? And,
Let's
I
Yeah,
Go
let's
ahead.
get into that. Like, what does that look like? Because we got 10 levers to go through. I'm very curious to think about, like, I don't even know what the levers are, and I'm gonna assume they're not brain surgery. They're not super hard to do,
No, it's not rocket science.
but it's that idea of people tend to overcomplicate the simplicity of something, right? Like I deal a lot with relationships, and I think people way overcomplicate relationships to the point of where they destroy them because they're overcomplicating. And when you just go back to the basics and be simple about it, right?
Right.
So I'm
Well,
excited to hear this because
when
I know
when
to be like, duh,
well, when people see my model, they go, "Of course, that's how it works."
right?
Right? This is obvious. Like, how did this guy get a PhD?
I'll give you an example of that. Like I was just on a call, I think it was yesterday, where I used to teach marriage courses, and in the marriage course, every once in a while, one of the things we would do is we would have a conference and we'd have people come, 2-day event or whatever. And part of the process was, all right, I want you each to write down 10 things that would just make you happy if your spouse did X, right? Just based upon whether it be your love languages or just things that you really appreciate. Write down 10 things. Okay. They both do that. Then they talk to each other about those 10 things. You're not allowed to argue with the other person about the 10 things that would make them happy. Right. And then when you're done, you swap over the list to each other, right? You just, okay, here's my list. And I had a guy in one of my classes go, wait, let me just a moment. Let me get this straight. I paid $3,000 to come to this event so you could help my wife write a list of things that would make her happy, have me write a list of things that make her happy, and swap those and give those to me. So now I know it will make her happy. And I said, yes. And he goes, worth every penny.
Yeah.
Right? It's the simple thing. Like it's not brain science. It's not rocket science. It's just like, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that's what this is going to be too.
It's very similar to that because
Yeah.
we all have the ability to build trust.
Yeah.
Just some are better than others,
Yeah.
right? And those who aren't very good have a lever that they pull. Usually it's the ability lever, right? Like, oh, I've
Oh,
got these kinds of credentials, this sort of background, this much experience.
yes.
You know,
Or I'm
I,
good at the thing.
I'm good at the thing.
And I'm good at this thing. So why ask me to do all these other things?
Everyone says I'm good at the thing. So you should
Yes.
just listen to me.
Yes.
And so that's one of the levers. Those who are better have multiple levers.
Mm,
Those who are really good have multiple levers and they know when to pull which one.
yeah. Makes sense. Totally makes sense.
And so uncertainty comes from two places. It comes from us as individuals and it comes from the context. Well, there's four levers within uncertainty. Three of them relate to us as individuals. And they are benevolence, which is the belief you've got my best interest at heart.
Mm-hmm.
Integrity. Do I follow through on my promises and do my actions line up with the values that I express? And ability. Do I have the competence to do what I say I'm going to do? And then context.
Competence is what you say, not
Yes.
competence, right?
Yes.
That's different. A lot of people will say, oh, I got the confidence to do it, but you don't have the competence.
Right.
Right.
And so
Right.
those are the four levers within uncertainty.
Wow.
And if we think about those, a lot of times I'll ask people who here's a great leader, and all the hands go up, and I say, "Oh, that's awesome. What does that mean?" And then they just stare at me, right? And they said, "Well, it just seemed like something I should think I'm good at." And so before we started this podcast, I asked you, "What's a great guest look like?" And you told me, and now I'm trying to hit that mark.
Mm-hmm.
But I included you in the conversation,
Right.
and we talked about your listeners, what they found compelling.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm trying to hit that mark. I'm trying to hit what good looks like. But I included you and some thought about your listeners in that definition. I didn't just come up with it myself.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, when I talk about benevolence, I'll be working with a group of families, and they'll say, who here has their kids' best interest at heart? And all the hands go up. And I'll say, how many of your kids would say that? And it's usually about a third, and it's somewhat hesitant. And so if it's not obvious in a place where it's supposed to be obvious, how do we make it land? Because let's be clear, me thinking I have benevolence doesn't really carry a lot of freight. You have to think I have benevolence.
So let's define benevolence for the audience, because I use a phrase often when I'm talking to leaders, this benevolent alpha. Like it's
Right.
important for you to have this benevolent alpha. And for me, it means to be able to make decisions and be confident in your decisions while using the humility that I'm open to other ideas. I want people to know that I'm not a tree that's stuck in my ways, but
Right.
I am going to make decisions so you can be confident in my leadership as well as. So talk to me about your idea of benevolence.
So I was on a podcast with a guy named Mark Devine, who's an ex-Navy SEAL.
Mm-hmm.
He had a great definition for it. He said, when you're in the SEALs, your primary responsibility is to the guy next to you
Hmm.
and to their success. And he said, so if you're in a team of 8, there are 7 other people who are focused on you being successful.
Hmm.
That's what benevolence starts to look like. It means having the best interest, not just of myself, but of the group and of the people within the group at heart.
Wow. So that means as a leader, sometimes that benevolence, for me anyway, this is what I get out of that, is having the best interest at heart for the people around you sometimes looks like having to correct them,
Yes.
sometimes looks like having to dismiss them,
Yes.
sometimes looks like, I mean, you have to have that ability because you really do. Benevolence is caring. Benevolence is that I really do have your back, even if it doesn't feel like it right now.
And how do we make it land? Right. So I've coached folks who've said, I've got this employee, they're really not doing well. They seem to be really struggling. They're really unhappy. And I say, this is not the right place for them.
Hmm.
How do you find a place for them to be successful and engaged and happy? It may be somewhere else within the organization, or it may be in a different setting.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in the best interest of the team and that individual for them to transition to someplace else. And it's, benevolence is not always being nice. I am benevolent towards my kids. And that means sometimes I hold them accountable. Sometimes I give them strong feedback. Um, but they believe that I have their best interest at heart. So it lands not as criticism or an attack, but rather, he's got my back.
And you know what? It's you built that, right? You built that belief in them. It wasn't an assumption just because I said so, right?
Right.
Which is a hard thing as a parent. I know I caught myself doing that a lot of times because I said so. That's why, right? But building that idea as a business owner, as a leader, you have to focus on building that ability for them to believe that you are looking out for themselves and or for them as well.
Right.
That the word that came to mind when you said that, and I use it a lot, but it just kind of struck me a little differently when you're talking about benevolence, is love.
Right.
Like, do you truly love that person as a human being enough to recognize that this might not be the best fit for them, and that you love them enough to say, hey, I gotta go. I do this it's a little bit that I do in some of my speeches, and it's funny, but it's also real, as I talk about how, you'll know when it's time to let somebody go when you walk in the door in the morning and they walk in at the same time, and you give your pleasantries of, hey, good morning, and they say good morning back, and the next thing you think is, man, I wish you would just quit so I don't have to be the person to let you go. Right?
Right.
It's like, wow, you're out of integrity right there. You're the one who has a problem, not them, and you don't love them enough. You're not benevolent enough. I really like that we think about benevolence in that way of caring about the other person and having their back.
Right.
Yeah.
And being able to take the risk of giving them honest feedback.
Yeah, it is a risk, right? Boy, talk about risk, right? Here's another way to build risk into that.
And when my sons played hockey,
Mhm.
I'd go to their games, and after the game I'd say that was great, and then I'd give them a couple of positive comments about things that they'd done well, specific things they'd done well. And then I'd say, do you want to just sit with that, or would you like to hear some feedback? And by including them in that process,
Sure.
and they'd always say, I want to get better. So what do you got? And I'd say, in this moment, you could have done this differently.
Right.
And I'd give them one piece, and that was it.
Mm.
And, when my oldest was 12, he looked at me one day and he said, Dad, even when you're upset with me, I know it's about what's best for me. And so if we can include the other person in the conversation, because a lot of times when we're working with our kids, we're thinking about today, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, 10 years down the road.
Sure.
We want them to engage in behaviors now that will help them 10 years from now.
Yeah.
I don't do that. I don't do that for myself.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you just got to look at me, Dino. I mean, this body doesn't just happen, right? There's years of neglect involved
Years
here.
of years of hard work.
There's some bad decisions that have been made, clearly. And so, it's a time frame thing that's a problem because our kids are thinking about right now.
Right.
And so we have to help them be successful in the moment to earn the right to talk about the future. And so it's the same thing if I'm a leader, I actually need to include the other person in that conversation. And this is something your listeners can try in their relationships. They can have a conversation tomorrow, pick someone that's sort of middle ground and say, I heard this guy, Darryl, he was talking about this term benevolence. It really means having somebody's best interest at heart or having their back.
Mm.
And I think I do that, but it doesn't always seem to land that way. Have you ever experienced that? And the other person's going to go, oh God, yes. And they're, pull a little bit, try to get a conversation going, ask them for examples, then start to narrow the funnel and say, has somebody ever really had your back? Like, have you ever had that experience where you really felt someone was on your side? And they'll go, oh yeah. And pull on that thread too. Who was it? What did they do? What did it look like? How did it feel? And now we're getting hints and we're priming them. And then we narrow the funnel further. We say, what would it look like if I had your back?
Mm.
What is success for you? How do I help you get there? Now we've created a moment of transparency where when we have future conversations or I make a future decision, I can refer back to that and say, you remember when you told me you wanted to be in Cirque du Soleil? This is me trying to help you get there.
Hey, there's no reason to learn how to own your role on your own. If you like that clip, go ahead and click right here for another one. Or if you want to watch the entire podcast, go ahead and click right here. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.